Loner rancher found the girl collapsed at the edge of the corral, no more than a silhouette wrapped in dust and dying light. No scream, no plea, just the dull thud of a body hitting earth, and the wind carrying the faint scent of blood and sagebrush. Eli McCrae stood in the doorway of his barn, rifle still cradled in his arms from chasing off coyotes that had been sniffing at his root cellar. At first he thought she was a mirage, just another trick of the desert heat, or perhaps a memory come to haunt him in the form of a broken stranger. But the mare had seen her first, ears flicking, muscles taut. Not a ghost then, flesh, wounded. The sky behind her bled into shades of rust and ash as the sun sank low over the Chiricahua Mountains. It had been a quiet evening, the kind of silence Eli had come to wear like an old coat, the kind only found at the edge of nowhere, where the land rolls and forgets its name. Now that silence cracked like thin ice. He didn't move right away. The instincts drilled into him from years of war and frontier life pulled him backward, warned him of traps, of complications. She was Apache by the look of her braids and the thin leather tunic clinging to her dust-caked frame. She might have been 17, might have been 20. She was bleeding from the shoulder, the dark patch spreading like ink through parchment. Eli muttered something under his breath, something halfway between a prayer and a curse, and lowered the rifle. It wasn't bravery, not really. It was the same pull that had made him lift wounded boys from muddy fields outside Shiloh and wrap torn limbs in canvas back when he still believed in fixing things. He approached slowly, boots crunching on the dry earth. Her eyes opened as he knelt, dark, defiant despite the glaze of pain. She tried to push herself upright, failed, and collapsed again. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Eli placed his hand under her neck, felt the rapid flutter of her pulse.
"You're safe," he said, not knowing if she spoke any English. "Ain't no one gonna hurt you here." He didn't know that for sure, not yet. He hadn't figured out if this moment was a storm's beginning or its aftermath. She smelled of smoke. Her left hand was clenched around something, small, wrapped in deer hide. He didn't pry it free. Instead, he carried her across the yard, past the dog who didn't bark, and into the cabin he'd built with hands still rough from the war. He laid her down on the cot near the fire, took a deep breath, and lit the lamp. Her blood was soaking through the blanket. He fetched clean water from the rain barrel, a needle, and the only thread he had that wasn't for mending saddles. As he cut away the fabric near her wound, he paused. Tattooed on her shoulder, half hidden beneath the wound and old scar tissue, was a symbol, circular, with the marks of 4 directions and a tree in its center. Eli's hand trembled, just slightly. He'd seen that mark once before, a long time ago, on the neck of a dying woman, Apache too, whispering a song he never understood, a healer's mark. He exhaled, deep, heavy. This wasn't just a girl running from a bullet. And as he cleaned the wound and stitched it closed by lamplight, he didn't realize. He was stitching the first seam in a story that would unravel everything he thought he knew about mercy, pride, and the sacred line between memory and redemption. He whispered a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Emma. And somewhere between the suture and the silence, Eli McCrae understood. The fire had returned to his valley, and this time it had a face. She slept for nearly 2 days. Eli didn't leave the cabin much during that time. He split wood, fed the dog, boiled water, kept the fire going, each motion deliberate, quiet, as if the walls themselves had thickened in the presence of this stranger, muffling the usual creaks of solitude. She moaned once, low and broken, gripped by fever, then fell silent. Eli laid a cold cloth across her brow and sat in the rocking chair beside the hearth, the old one with a leg he'd carved himself after it cracked during the winter of '72. He didn't know her name. She hadn't spoken since he found her, but she was still alive, and that counted for something. There was a rhythm to waiting, one he knew well. He'd waited by hospital cots, by battlefield trenches, by a grave that bore the name of his daughter, Emma McCrae. Died of fever, 8 years old. He'd held her hand as she burned from the inside out, whispering psalms he hadn't read in decades. The Lord is my shepherd. But no rod, no staff had come for her, only silence. After that, the Bible stayed closed. Faith folded in on itself like a letter never mailed. But now here was this girl, another child burning beneath his roof, a ghost of what he couldn't save. Late into the second night, she stirred. Eli was half asleep, head resting against the window pane, when her voice cracked through the quiet. Water! He was at her side in 2 strides, cradling her head, tipping the tin cup gently to her lips. She drank greedily, then choked, coughing hard. Her eyes were open now, clouded, but sharp enough to scan the room. Where am I? Her voice was hoarse, but her English, though accented, was clear. Arizona, Eli said. Edge of the Chiricahua. You're safe here. She blinked, trying to sit up, wincing as her stitched shoulder protested. You stitched me, she murmured. I did. Why? Eli didn't answer right away. He poured another cup of water, handed it to her. When she took it, he noticed something clenched still in her other hand, a bundle of deer hide, no larger than a stone, a pouch of sorts, tied with twine. He remembered it from before, still didn't ask. You were bleeding, he said finally. Didn't seem right to let you die alone. She stared at him, cautious, eyes studying the lines on his face, the wear in his knuckles. Most men would have let me. I'm not most men, he replied. A flicker of something passed across her face. Not trust, not yet, but not fear either. What's your name? He asked. Naya. He nodded slowly. I'm Eli. She turned her head toward the small window above the cot. Outside, the wind was picking up again. The pines swayed like they were whispering secrets to each other. I need to get back, she whispered. They're dying. Who? My people. She closed her eyes, as if the weight of the word itself was too much. A tremble passed through her. They came looking for a cure, she said, barely above a breath. But all they found was fire. Eli's jaw tensed. Someone's after you. She didn't answer, just opened her hand at last. Inside the deerskin pouch was a carved piece of bone, etched with the same symbol Eli had seen on her shoulder. A healer's token. He hadn't seen one in years, not since a woman in Tucson bled out in his arms, singing a language he couldn't understand, while townsfolk stood back and called her witch. He looked at Naya again, not as a child, not as a stranger, but as a storm bearing down in silence. There was a story in her bones, and whatever it was, it had enemies. Outside, the wind howled louder, and Eli McCrae, man of silence, of solitude, felt the ground shift beneath the floorboards of his quiet life, again. He looked once more at the strange mark in her palm, then at the firelight flickering across her face. Too young to carry such fear, too still for someone who had just outrun death. He had seen war, betrayal, even miracles that came too late. But this girl? Who had come for her in blood and silence? And what secret did they believe she carried that was worth killing for? If you're like this video, now drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The morning came slowly, wrapped in the hush of drifting dust and distant wind. Eli McCrae stood at the edge of his porch, one hand on the post, the other cradling a chipped enamel cup of coffee gone cold. He hadn't slept. The fire had long burned down to ash, but the memory of the fevered girl's breath, shallow and fragile, still clung to the cabin walls. Behind him, inside, Nia slept again,
This time not from exhaustion, but rest. Her fever had broken, though she was weak and spoke little. In the few words she had managed, Eli had learned only pieces. She was running from men who weren't meant to follow her this far north. Men with boots that left square prints, not moccasins. White men. He scanned the horizon. The land here didn't keep secrets for long. It was open and unkind, the kind of country that made small things seem even smaller. And yet it hid things too. Shadows in the ravines, shapes that didn't belong. Near the arroyo, just past the scrub line, Eli spotted something that didn't sit right. A smudge of black. Charred grass. Still warm when he pressed his fingers to the earth. Someone had lit a fire here. Not last week, not yesterday, this morning. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing. When he returned to the cabin, Nia was sitting up, her legs draped with a blanket, hands cradling the pouch of carved bone like it held her whole world. "You're being followed," Eli said without preamble. She nodded, slowly. "They burn the ground before they come, so I'd know they're close." Eli raised an eyebrow. "A warning?" "A message," she corrected. "They're not hunting me for vengeance. They fear what I carry." Eli didn't ask what she meant, not yet. Instead, he moved to the cabinet near the stove, pulled out a saddlebag, began stuffing it with dried meat, cornmeal, a half-filled canteen. His motions were deliberate, measured, not rushed, but final. "We're leaving," he said. Nia watched him with eyes that had seen too much. "They'll follow." "They already are." He paused. "There's a place up in the ridge. No trails, no markers. Only the old stone gate and the silence of the mountain." Her eyes lit with cautious recognition. "The place of wind? That what your people call it?" She nodded. "It's sacred. We're not meant to go there." "Then it's the perfect place." Eli turned to her, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his expression. Not just concern, but the faint echo of command. He had once led men, she realized, once made decisions that meant the difference between life and a pine box. "You can walk?" he asked. She nodded again, though her hands trembled as she pushed herself upright. It took them the better part of an hour to pack what little they needed: herbs, salve, a single revolver. Nia refused to leave the pouch behind. She tucked it into the folds of her dress, just beneath her collarbone. Before they left, Eli stood for a long moment in the doorway, looking back at the cabin. It wasn't much: bare walls, cold hearth, an empty Bible on the shelf. But it had been the only thing that hadn't left him. Until now. They mounted the hill behind the property in silence. No trail, only instinct. Nia leaned heavily on his arm as they climbed, her breath tight but determined. Halfway up, they paused beneath a twisted cedar. "You don't have to help me," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything." Eli didn't answer for a long time. Then, voice like gravel, "Maybe I'm not helping you. Maybe I'm just running towards something that might matter." She turned to him, studying his face. "You've lost someone." He didn't nod, didn't speak, but she saw it in the tightness of his jaw. "The fever," she whispered. This time his voice cracked. 8 years old. Her name was Emma. They stood there, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people carrying wounds the world had stopped seeing. And in that moment, among wind-scraped rocks and dying cedar, a fragile alliance was born. Not yet trust, not yet friendship, but something that pointed in that direction. As they climbed higher, a raven circled overhead, letting out a sharp cry. And far behind them, beyond the hills and dead grass, boot prints burned black into the land. They made camp just before dusk, in a hollow where the rocks formed a natural bowl and the wind couldn't claw its way in so easily. Eli gathered deadwood while Nia built the fire, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. She moved with the memory of ritual, each motion rooted in something older than survival, something sacred. When the fire caught, she sat back on her heels and stared into the flames. Eli handed her a strip of jerky and a flask of boiled creek water. They ate in silence. Above them, stars began to etch themselves into the deepening sky, sharp and countless, like old souls blinking awake. After a time, Eli spoke. "You said they fear what you carry." Naya didn't answer right away. She reached into her tunic and drew out the bone-carved token again, running her thumb across its smooth surface. "My mother," she began, voice soft, "was the last medicine woman of our bloodline. Not a shaman like the ones who chant to the sky, but a healer. She knew plants, roots, the way the body bends and breaks. She kept her knowledge in memory, not in smoke." Eli said nothing, letting the rhythm of her story settle between them. "When I was a child," she began, quietly, "it was forbidden. Too many feared the old ways would make us weak in the face of guns and railroads. But she believed healing was power, not for war, for life." She paused, eyes reflecting firelight like liquid amber. "Last spring, soldiers came to the reservation. Said they were bringing medicine, a vaccine. They told us it would stop the sickness that had taken so many. My father, Chief Eska, agreed to it. He trusted them." Her voice hardened. But it wasn't medicine. It was something untested, a military experiment. Within days, people began to die. Not from the fever, but from what they were given. Eli's hand tightened around his knee. They silenced the ones who asked questions. My mother, she confronted them. She told them she recognized the compound, that it wasn't safe. She died that night. They said it was an accident. Naya looked up, her jaw set, her voice unwavering now. "I escaped with what knowledge she passed to me. This," she held up the token, "is not just a symbol. It holds a code, a formula, a way to neutralize what they gave us." Eli stared at the fire. "You think they'll kill to keep that quiet?" "I know they will. One tried, at the river. I left him bleeding." Silence stretched between them. Only the crackle of fire and the distant cry of a coyote filled the void. Then Eli spoke, his voice low. "You said your father trusted them. You still believe in him?" She hesitated. "He is a man torn between two worlds, between the spirits of his ancestors and the bullets of the white men. He believes peace must come with a price, but this was betrayal." Eli nodded slowly, his mind drifting. He remembered the war, the Union hospitals overflowing, the smell of antiseptic and death, the promises made by generals with clean boots and bloody hands. He looked at her, really looked. "You're not just running from them," he said. "You're running towards something." She met his eyes. "I need to get back. They need me. If I can mix the right herbs, if I can apply what my mother taught, maybe I can stop it. Maybe I can save what's left." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a handkerchief, worn, embroidered with the name Emma. "She died of fever," he said simply. "Doctors couldn't help. They tried, but they didn't understand what it was." Naya's gaze softened. She reached out, gently returned the cloth to his hand. "I'm sorry," she said.
"I truly am." They sat quietly, two broken halves of different histories, held together by a firelight neither fully understood. In the distance, across the canyon, a faint flicker danced in the dark, another campfire, not theirs. Eli saw it, so did she. "They're close," he murmured. Naya nodded. "We keep moving," she said, "at first light." And as the fire burned low, Eli whispered,
Not a prayer, but something like it. Let truth be stronger than silence this time. The sun rose pale and colorless over the ridgeline, casting long, skeletal shadows across the granite slopes. The air up here was different, thinner, quieter. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath as Eli and Naya made their way upward, the path narrowing to little more than a goat trail lost among broken stone. They had spoken little since leaving the hollow. Their breath came short in the thin air. Naya leaned heavily on her walking stick, carved from juniper, marked with shallow glyphs, and Eli carried both their packs, shoulders taut beneath the strain. The trail curled like a spine, and as they rounded a boulder, Naya stopped. Before them, carved into the stone face of the mountain, stood a crude arch made of stacked flat rocks and twisted wood. Bones hung from the top beam, bleached white, rattling in the breeze. Small bundles of feathers and dried berries swayed beneath them. Eli stopped beside her. "What is this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The gate of stillness." He raised an eyebrow. "You said this place was sacred." "It is," she replied, not moving. "It's where the old ones came to speak with the spirits, a place of judgment and forgetting." Eli looked around. The land felt different here, not just wild, but aware. The way old churches sometimes feel when no one's spoken inside them for too long. "You sure it's safe?" Naya didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward, removed her necklace, and laid it gently at the base of the arch. Then she touched her forehead to the stone and murmured something in Apache, low, rhythmic, reverent. Eli waited. When she rose, her eyes were heavy, as if carrying a burden he couldn't see. "Anyone who enters must do so with clean heart," she said. "The spirits forgive much, but not deceit." He nodded slowly. "I'll leave my sins at the gate then." She glanced sideways at him, a hint of something wry in her gaze. "Just don't pick them back up on the way out." They passed beneath the arch together. The land beyond felt ancient, older than the war, older than names. Twisted pines rose like watchmen. The trail dipped and curved past sun-bleached rocks and half-buried carvings in the sandstone. Spirals, hands, a serpent coiled around a tree. At midday they stopped to rest near a spring, water trickling out of the rocks into a clear basin. Nia drank and dabbed the water on her face, then motioned for Eli to sit beside her. "You said your daughter's name was Emma," she began. He nodded. "Smart, brave, too curious for her own good. She would have liked this place." Eli gave a small smile. "She used to draw shapes in the dirt, said she was writing letters to God." Nia's expression shifted, gentle, wistful. "We believe this land listens, even now. It remembers the footsteps of those who ask with honest hearts." He looked around. "Then maybe it remembers mine?" She nodded. "Maybe." As they prepared to move on, Eli noticed something stuck between two stones just off the path. A black feathered arrow, old, ceremonial, but fresh. He bent down and touched the shaft, still warm from sunlight. But it wasn't the heat that chilled him. It was the direction it pointed. Downhill, back toward where they'd come. "They know," he said softly. Nia's face paled. "Gore." Eli rose, sliding the revolver from his belt. "We keep going, fast." They moved quickly through the trees, every shadow now a question. The ridge narrowed again, forcing them into single file. The silence was thick, not peaceful, but watching. And as they reached the upper plateau, they came upon a ring of stones, ancient, cracked, arranged in a perfect circle. In its center sat a post. On it hung a single piece of hide, tattered but unmistakable. It was painted with a symbol Eli had seen before. the mark of exile. Nia stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. "He's warning us." Eli looked at her. "He's not warning, he's declaring." The ridge had become more than sanctuary. It was now the battlefield. And Eli McCrae, who once thought he'd buried every reason to fight, felt something stir in his chest again. Not rage, but resolve. Gore stood on the edge of the mesa, where the wind rose up in waves and carried with it the scent of dust, pine, and something darker, smoke maybe, or old blood. He held a length of black crow feather in one hand and a flint knife in the other, carving slow, deliberate lines into the shaft of an arrow. Below him, the valley sprawled in silence. The same valley where he'd once run wild as a child, where the drums had thundered in the dusk, and the stories of the ancestors filled the night like fireflies. Now the drums were quiet, and the stories twisted. A boy approached, barely 16 winters old, with paint still drying on his cheeks. "You sent the mark," he said. Gore didn't look up. "Yes. They'll know it's you. They're meant to." He finished carving, tied the feather with sinew, and held the arrow to the sky for a moment, as if asking for some ancient approval. Then he turned to the boy. "Go. Tell the others to be ready. The sickness has returned. So has betrayal." The boy hesitated. But it was the white man's medicine that— "It is always the white man's medicine," Gore snapped, eyes flashing. "They bring potions and papers, words wrapped in poison. They speak of peace and healing, but their peace kills slowly, and their healing forgets who we are." The boy swallowed hard, nodded, and ran back down the trail. Gore stayed a moment longer. He remembered Naya as a child, barefoot in the spring, running through the sage, laughing at birds. She had been kind, bright, the daughter of a chief, yes, but still Apache. But then came her mother's teachings, quiet whispers of medicine that did not come from the spirits, but from the leaves, the earth, the eyes of the white doctors she had once met in secret. And Naya, like her mother, began to believe. When the sickness came, it was not Gore who was asked to lead the healing ceremonies. It was Naya's mother. And when the soldiers arrived, Gore had stood ready to fight. But Chief Eska had opened the gates. They came bearing promises, and they left behind the dead. The old women still wept in their lodges. The air still stank of sickness and grief. But what haunted Gore most wasn't the dead. It was the silence of the people who had once followed him. And now she returns, the girl, with a white man, to bring what? More potions? More apologies? He would not let it happen, not again, not to what remained. Later that night, by the sacred fire in the heart of the camp, Gore spoke to those who still gathered to hear him. Young warriors mostly, and a few old men whose eyes had grown clouded, but whose anger still burned. "They bring her back to us not as a daughter, but as a dealer of foreign cures," Gore said, his voice rising. "And beside her, a man who once wore the blue of the killers. They speak of healing, but what they bring is a slow death." An elder stirred. "She carries the mark." "A mark carved by hands that have forgotten the chance, that kneel before the knife of science, not the spirit of the wind." A murmur passed through the circle. Some nodded, others glanced away, unsure. Gore leaned forward, his voice low now. "We have survived guns. We have survived drought and prison and the breaking of our children's tongues. But if we lose our truth, if we bow our heads to white cures and forget the prayers of our grandmothers, we will not survive what comes next." He stepped back, let the words settle. In the shadows, a shape moved. An old woman stepped forward, bent with time, her hair in long silver braids. She said nothing, only laid a bundle of sage at Gore's feet, a blessing. He nodded. The war hadn't ended. It had only gone quiet. Now it stirred again, and this time it wore the face of a girl he once called kin. The village came into view at twilight. Built among the rocks and scrub oak, it was more memory than structure. Half-buried lodges of willow and hide, smoke curling from earthen chimneys, the soft rhythm of drums rising like the heartbeat of a people who had lost too much to silence. But still they endured. Eli and Naya stood at the crest of the hill, shadows long behind them, dust clinging to their boots and bones. She had not spoken for the last hour. Her face had drawn inward, a mask carved from sorrow and resolve. Eli kept close, his revolver hidden beneath his coat, not out of threat, but out of habit. As they descended, eyes rose to meet them. Children stopped playing. Women paused at their fires. A dog barked once, then retreated. By the time they stepped into the center of the village, a crowd had gathered. Then Gore appeared. He stepped from a circle of young warriors, his body tall and lean, wrapped in dark deerhide. His eyes burned beneath painted brows, black streaks like storm clouds ready to fall. He looked first at Naya, not as kin, but as betrayal in human form. Then he looked at Eli. "So," he said, voice cutting through the dusk, "you bring him here?" Naya lifted her chin. "I bring healing. You bring desecration." Eli stepped forward. "She's not here to harm anyone." Gore's smile was humorless. "And you, old man, what do you call yourself? Savior, soldier turned shepherd?" "I call myself a witness," Eli said calmly, "to a plague that's already killed too many." The crowd stirred. Gore raised his hand. "This is not your place, white man." "He's with me," Naya said. "That," Gore growled, "is exactly the problem." The tension thickened, pressing in like desert heat. Then a voice rasped from the largest lodge near the fire circle. "Let them speak." The crowd parted as Chief Eska emerged. Older than Eli expected, hunched but still tall, draped in a robe of old buffalo skin etched with fading paint. His eyes, though clouded with age, were sharp beneath his brows. He looked first at his daughter. "Naya?" She lowered her head. Then at Eli. "You come here by her will?" "I do." "And you carry no weapon against us?" "I carry only what is needed to survive the road." Eska nodded slowly. "Then you are a guest, and all guests deserve words." He motioned toward the circle of stones near the fire, the traditional place of speaking, of judgment. Naya stepped inside first. She unwrapped the pouch from her tunic and held up the carved token for all to see. "This," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "was given to me by my mother before she died. It carries not only her mark, but her knowledge. Inside this symbol is a medicine, a real one, one that can undo what the soldiers did." A murmur rose. Gore's face twisted. "And you trust this knowledge more than the spirits?" "I trust what I've seen," she answered. "I've seen children die after the medicine the soldiers gave. I've seen herbs cool fever when prayers could not. I believe in the spirits, but I also believe the Creator gave us hands and minds for more than chanting." Gasps, whispers. Then Eli stepped forward. "I don't speak your tongue," he said, "but I know grief. I've lost a daughter to fever, and I've held too many men in my arms while they bled out, waiting on a miracle that never came. And sometimes it's the courage to listen to her." Chief Eska looked at both of them, long and heavy. Then he turned to Gore. "You say they bring danger?" Gore nodded. "The spirits grow silent with them near." Eska turned back to Naya. "And you, do you ask to stay?" "No," she said. "I ask for one lodge, for the sick, to try, that's all." Eska closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he lifted his hand and made a simple gesture, open palm to the earth, the gesture of permission. A murmur rolled through the crowd, shock, approval, dissent. But Eska said only, "Let her try." Gore turned sharply, stormed away. But the circle had been opened. And as Naya knelt by the fire to prepare her medicines, and Eli helped stake the corners of a new lodge, the sky above the village burned with the first light of stars. It was not peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of a reckoning. It was not peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of a reckoning. As the crowd slowly dispersed into the night, and the last embers of judgment cooled in the circle of stones, a stillness fell over the village. Not of comfort, but of breath held. Inside the newly staked lodge, Naya laid out her mother's herbs under flickering lamplight, and Eli stood guard just beyond the threshold. Outside, the wind had changed, and somewhere beyond the ridge, the fever stirred again, silent, swift, and unforgiving. The true trial had yet to begin. The first cries came before dawn. A young boy, Kasha, son of her childhood friend Senya, was found trembling in his bed, sweat soaking his deer-hide blanket, his skin mottled with strange, angry blotches. He couldn't speak, only shiver and moan. Naya was the first to reach him. She didn't wait for permission. She pressed the back of her hand to his fevered brow, then turned toward the gathering crowd, her voice steady. "Clear this lodge, now." Some obeyed out of shock. Others hesitated. But it was Chief Eska who stepped forward from the shadows, looking not at the child, but at Nia. "You are sure?" She met his gaze. "I must try." And just like that, it began. They gave her the healer's hut, the old lodge of the midwives, long disused since the last winter claimed the elders. Eli helped drag in the pallets, while Nia gathered what she could, sage bundles, strips of cotton root bark, the last of her mother's yarrow paste. The child was laid in the center of the lodge. His breath came in short, rattling gulps. Outside, whispers spread like wind in dry grass. Some said it was the white man's curse. Others claimed it was the army's poisoned blankets, still working through generations. One old woman spat in the dirt and muttered, "We should let the spirits decide." But Nia had already decided. She worked without pause. Boiled water, cooled cloths, burned sweetgrass not as a shaman's rite, but as her mother once had, to cleanse the air. She ground willow bark between flat stones, mixing it with lukewarm broth, and coaxed it gently between Kasha's lips. Eli stood by the door, his arms crossed tight against his chest. The boy reminded him of Caleb, his grandson, gone to fever in a different time, under a tin roof far from this place. By midday, Kasha's fever spiked. He cried out, delirious. Nia didn't flinch. She pressed poultices to his chest, whispered old songs her mother once sang over her when she was small and sick and afraid. Not prayers, not spells, just the rhythm of care, the drumbeat of a soul refusing to give in to death. And all the while, outside the lodge, the village waited. Some stood with folded arms, hard eyes. Others brought bundles of herbs or filled buckets at the stream. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers sharpened knives, not in threat, but in helpless ritual. Then came the second case. A woman, middle-aged, strong. She collapsed beside the cook fire with trembling hands and lips stained blue. And the third. Within a day, 5 lay inside the healer's hut. Naya moved between them like a shadow, tireless. Eli helped where he could, tending the fire, fetching water, steadying those who woke in panic. And still the doubt grew. At dusk, Gore returned to the circle of stones. He said nothing, just watched, like a hawk measuring wind. Naya knew this was only the beginning. But she also knew this. If even one of them lived, if even one soul crossed back from the edge of death, she would have done more than any spirit ever asked of her. As night fell and stars pierced the black sky like tiny wounds, Naya sat beside Kasha's cot. His breathing had slowed. Not better, not worse, just quieter. Eli placed a blanket around her shoulders without a word. She didn't thank him. She simply whispered, "Tomorrow will tell." The fire burned low in the healer's lodge. Kasha slept, his fever down to a manageable glow. 2 others still fought the illness, eyes dull but breathing steady. But Eli had begun to sweat. At first he dismissed it. Too many nights without sleep, too many hours bent over boiling pots and shoveling ashes. But by mid-morning, Naya saw the truth in his gait, the stiffness in his shoulders, the flush climbing his neck like wildfire. "Sit," she ordered. "I'm fine," he replied. "You're not," she said, firmer now. He wavered, then nodded once, sat, and closed his eyes. By nightfall, he was curled beneath a blanket near the far end of the lodge, his chest rising in shallow heaves. His lips were dry, his skin too hot. Naya worked in silence, her hands trembling. This man had carried her from blood and dust, had stood between her and every unkind glance, every whispered doubt. He had kept her breathing through fear and scorn and sleepless nights. Now the same breath might slip from his lungs, and she could not bear it. As she wrung a cloth in cool water, pressing it gently to his brow, Eli stirred. "Naya," he whispered, voice raw. She leaned close. "I'm here." His eyes, glassy but still deep as canyon stone, searched her face. "If I don't make it, you will." He gave a tired smile. "Let me speak, girl." She blinked, bit her lip, nodded. "I don't believe in much anymore. Haven't for years. Not since Martha passed. Not since the war took my boy. But if there's still a God watchin'," he trailed off, swallowed hard, "then I reckon he sent me here for this, for you." Naya's throat tightened. Eli continued, weaker now, each word a gasp. "If I go, you keep fighting. You save who you can. Don't let that fearmonger out there turn folks to stone again." And with that, he slipped into fevered sleep. Naya sat beside him through the long hours, grinding roots, whispering prayers, not to spirits, not to any old god, but to the quiet courage her mother once called faith. Just before dawn, hoofbeats sounded beyond the village edge. Riders. The guards at the outer circle called a challenge, but the voice that answered was unmistakable, low, calm, commanding. "Let me through. I come in peace." Moments later, the flap of the healer's lodge rustled, and in stepped a man, dusted in trail dust, bearing a cross of iron around his neck. "Father Lucian," Naya whispered. He was older now, white streaks in his beard, but his eyes were the same, clear, watchful, alive with something deeper than mere knowledge. "I heard the wind carried sickness," he said simply, "and the Lord stirred my feet." Behind him stood a woman in blue calico, no older than 25. She carried a leather satchel marked with a red thread. "This is Clara," Lucian added. "She trained under the sisters in Santa Fe. She's seen smallpox before." Naya nodded, barely trusting herself to breathe. Father Lucian stepped to Eli's side, knelt, and placed a hand gently over his. "I never thought I'd see you flat on your back, McCrae," he murmured. Then, softly, "Let's see if heaven still has ears for a stubborn soul like you." It began with a scream. A child, little Mayu, no more than 6, collapsed near the cook fire. Within moments, 2 more joined her in the dust, trembling with the telltale fever. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs became voices. She was fine this morning. They said the white woman's medicine worked, but why are more falling? In the gathering dusk, Gore stood once more among the people, his face shadowed beneath the edge of his buffalo hide cloak. "I warned you," he said. His voice, calm and cold, cut through the evening air like a knife. "You opened the lodge of life to death. You trusted the poison of white blood." He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Nia standing at the healer's lodge, her tunic stained with sweat and herbs, her hands blackened from ash and root. "This woman brings death. She hides behind words and powders, but she cannot stop what's coming." Father Lucian moved to Nia's side. "Gore, if you mean to accuse, speak truth." Gore turned to him. "You bring the cross of your God, priest, but where was he when our children died?" A hush fell. Even the crickets stilled. Nia's chest tightened. Behind her, Eli stirred faintly. Clara tended him, whispering quiet instructions to one of the village girls. The healer's lodge was full to its limits. But the village, torn between fear and newfound faith, waited. "I have seen this before," Gore continued. "The old ways are not for barter. They are not to be cast aside for the comforts of foreign hands." He drew a line in the dirt with his staff. "Tonight we choose, her medicine or our soul." The line cut the village in 2. Some stood with Gore, those who had buried too many. Some stepped forward silently, forming a wall near Nia and the lodge. Mothers, young braves, even an elder with tears in his eyes. Chief Eska stepped slowly from the gathering circle. His gaze fell on Gore. "You claim to speak for the ancestors," Eska said, voice hoarse. "But will you shame them now with fear?" Gore raised his hand. "I speak for the spirits." "No," a voice interrupted, soft but firm. It was Nia. She stepped past Lucian, past the line. "I do not ask for worship," she said. "I do not pretend to replace your old ways." She turned to the crowd, her voice trembling but strong. "But I have held the hands of the dying. I have felt life return under my palms. If I am to be judged, let it be for what I have done, not for what I was born." Gore sneered, words from a ghost. Then the final blow fell. From the healer's lodge, a small voice cried out, "Nia?" It was Kasha, standing, pale, thin, but alive. A mother sobbed aloud. Another stepped forward. "My child's fever is gone." One by one, voices rose. And Gore, so sure, so rigid, saw the ground shift beneath him. No one raised a weapon, no one shouted. But as he turned to speak again, no voice answered. No hand reached out. He had become a shadow, a man left behind by the very people he sought to command. Chief Eska lowered his gaze. "Go, Gore. You are no longer one of us." The night that followed Gore's exile was silent. No chants, no cries, only the rustle of wind across sleeping hides and the occasional cough from the quarantine lodge. Inside, Nia sat at Eli's side, a cool cloth on his brow, Clara dozing nearby. Eli breathed, slow, steady. When the dawn came, it was not with fanfare or trumpets. It came with the soft laughter of a child outside the healer's lodge. Mayu, who had collapsed 2 nights before, was standing near the cook fire, biting into a piece of roasted squash. Her mother wept openly, holding her close. One by one, others stirred. The fevers had stopped spreading. The sick began to eat again, to rise from their blankets. Kasha had begun to walk the lodge, helping the weaker ones with water. Clara smiled through tears as one of the elders kissed her hand. And Eli? He opened his eyes, took a breath. "Still here," he rasped. Nia let out a trembling laugh and wept into his shoulder. Outside, the people gathered, not for judgment, not for protest, but for thanks. Chief Eska addressed them with a voice both weary and proud. "We stood at the edge of death and found life. We owe that to a woman many called outsider. She is no longer outside." He looked at Nia and bowed his head. "She is Ina Nodlu, she who restores life." The people echoed the name, not shouted, whispered, like a prayer. Nia felt it ripple through her, like warmth from a distant fire, a belonging she had never dared to hope for. And Eli? He stood that evening, leaning on Kasha, his voice gravelly but steady. "I didn't come here to save anyone," he said. "I came to disappear, but God had other plans. Turns out, when you stop running, you might find something worth standing for." Father Lucian placed a hand on his shoulder. "And sometimes, Eli McCrae, standing still is the greatest act of faith." That night, for the first time in weeks, the drums of mourning did not sound. Instead, the people lit a great fire at the center of the village, not for the dead, but for the living. When spring finally crested the hills, the scent of blooming mesquite mingled with the smoke of cook fires. The healer's lodge, once a place of hushed fear and whispered last rites, now rang with the soft hum of children's feet and the sound of laughter too long silenced. Clara taught 2 of the village girls how to grind the bark of willow just right, while Nia checked a boy's bandaged hand with a gentleness that masked sharp precision. Outside, the land had softened. Shoots of green threaded the hard earth. The sun no longer scorched, it warmed. And Eli? He walked, still favoring his right leg, but upright, with his wide-brimmed hat low and his eyes clearer than they had been in years. He had taken to mending fence posts with the young braves, and though he never said much, they watched how he moved, steady, measured, and began to do the same. He was no longer the ghost with a rifle. He was simply Eli. Chief Eska approached him one morning while they watered the corral. The chief held out a carved stick of mesquite burned with symbols along the length. "For you," Eska said, "a mark of honor, not for blood spilled, but for blood preserved." Eli turned the stick in his hand, humbled. "Don't feel like I deserve it." "You stood between us and death," Eska replied. "That is enough." Down by the creek, Naya stood beneath the cottonwood tree where her mother used to gather herbs. She was no longer watched from a distance, no longer whispered about. The women now came to her with questions, with offerings of seeds and beads, even songs their grandmothers once sang. She had been the outsider, the ghost, the captive. Now they called her sister. That evening, she and Eli sat on the slope beyond the lodge, the village behind them, and the sky above awash in gold and blue. "You ever think," Eli murmured, "about going back east?" Naya didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the horizon, where the hills melted into sky. "I did," she said, "but there's nothing waiting for me there but the ghost of a girl who didn't survive." She turned to him. "I found my name here. I think I'll keep it." Eli gave a small nod. "Reckon I found mine, too." They sat in silence, watching the stars come out, one by one, like promises. Weeks passed. The fever had gone, but it left behind more than just scars. It carved silence into certain lodges where no children's voices would return, and carved lines into the faces of those who remained. But it also carved something deeper: understanding. At the center of the village, a small cairn of river stones had been raised. Not a grave, but a remembrance. For all who had gone, and for the way they had gone. Not alone, not forgotten, but held in the hands of those who stayed and fought. Naya knelt by the cairn one afternoon, placing a sprig of sage and a single bead from her mother's pouch. She whispered a prayer, not to spirits, not to the ancestors, but to the breath of God, the way Eli had once done with bowed head and closed eyes. Behind her, Clara approached, carrying a woven basket filled with dried herbs. She waited, then placed it gently beside the stones. "We wouldn't have made it without you," Clara said softly. "I wouldn't have made it without you," Naya replied. They sat together for a while. No more words were needed. Across the clearing, young boys mimicked swordplay with sticks, yelling the names of Eli and Kasha like they were legends. Kasha, mortified, ducked behind the woodpile, only to be dragged out laughing. The village breathed again, not just in survival, but in joy. Eli, meanwhile, helped Seth repair the old meeting lodge, now repurposed as a place of teaching. Father Lucian had left them a few battered books, journals on healing, scripture, and one leather-bound volume titled The Earth Remembers. They placed it beside the mortar and pestles. "Think the old world would understand this?" Seth asked. "No," Eli said, smiling faintly, "but that's what makes it worth keeping." That night, Chief Eska gathered the tribe. He spoke of the cost, of those lost, but also of what had been won: unity, new wisdom, and the courage to choose life over fear. Then, in a gesture unexpected and unbidden, he stepped aside. "Leadership," he said, "does not come from bloodlines, but from those who bleed for the people." And with that, he passed the ceremonial stone, etched with fire and wind, into the hands of his daughter. Naya stood still for a long moment. Then she took it. The people bowed, not in formality, but in faith. It was nearly summer when the last sign of the sickness vanished from the village. The wildflowers returned to the creek beds, and with them the birds. Children waded barefoot through the shallows, chasing minnows and dreams. Life, as it always does, insisted on blooming again. One morning, Naya rose before the sun. She walked to the edge of the village where the trail bent eastward, toward the world she had once belonged to. A fine horse stood waiting, saddled by her own hands, stocked for a long journey. She stood beside it, hand on the reins. Behind her, the village was waking. The smell of maize porridge drifted on the breeze, and Eli's slow, even footsteps crunched the path behind her. "Sun's not up yet," he said. "No," she replied, "but I needed to see which way it would rise." He waited. "I could leave," she continued, not looking at him. "No one would stop me. I have the skills, the freedom, even a name to go back to." "But?" Eli asked. "But when I look at that trail, I don't see home. I see a road that leads to forgetting." She turned to him, and the morning light caught the edge of her face. "Here they call me Enna Nodlu. They remember me. They remember what we built." Eli nodded slowly. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying." He smiled. "I reckon I will too, then." They turned back toward the village, toward laughter, labor, and land that no longer felt borrowed. As they walked, Naya took Eli's hand. Not with urgency, not with romance, but with the solemn, quiet unity of those who had bled together and lived. In the stories told around fires for generations after, they would speak of the fever winter, the white healer, and the warrior who chose mercy. They would say that in the year the sky turned red, It wasn't vengeance or tradition that saved them, but compassion, understanding, faith, and the greatest truth of all, that sometimes family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you choose, again and again, through dust and storm, fire and grace. And then, in the silence that followed, one truth remained. This is a story of kindness chosen over might, of broken hearts stitched back together, not by force, but by the smallest of acts: clean water, steady hands, and the courage to listen when the world expected war. Ina Nodlu and Eli didn't change history with a rifle or an arrow. They changed it by refusing to see each other as enemies. And perhaps that is the truest Wild West of all, not found in the roar of gunfire or the dust of duels, but in the quiet triumph of understanding in a land that rarely forgives. What emotion stayed with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice might just inspire the next chapter in our journey through true Wild West stories. Because the West wasn't just about conquering the land. It was about learning to live with it and with each other. And many more true Wild West stories are still waiting, buried in the dust. All they need is someone willing to listen. Someone like you.